So let's have ourselves a little bit of a chin wag in regards to the Maxxis razr mud terrains I was running in a 315 7516, or pretty much a 35. Since gone away from them a couple of days ago, I went back to the trusty Toyo Open Country mud terrain. This is my third set, by far my favourite tyre I've ever ran. I've also gone back to a 285 7516, or what's pretty much a 33. Interestingly, these actually measure up to an exact 33, this particular Toyo. Now, the main reason these are my favourite tyres is simply because this is my third set. These are the only tyre I've never punctured. Now, that's not exactly true. I've had a stick through the sidewall in one of these tyres, but that was when I was running a set of these 285s on the factory 7-inch wide GXL rims, which you're not supposed to do. I thought, it'll be alright. I see plenty of people doing it. Yes, you can do it, like it'll physically work, but the sidewall doesn't really sit right. The tyre's not running how it was designed to run. So the sidewall bulges how it shouldn't. It bulges in the wrong spot. I found out the hard way and ended up with a flat tyre. Aside from that, I usually run these tyres with like these 285s with an 8-inch wide rim, which is good, right in the sweet spot. These rims right here are a 9-inch wide rim, because obviously I was running the 315 7516 tyres on these rims. So normally with a 285 I'd run an 8-inch wide rim, but these are approved to be run on a rim width of 9 inches as well. I've just never done it before. So this is the first time running this size tyre on a 9-inch wide rim, but they mount up good and it works good, and I'm happy with how the tyre actually sits and the amount of bulge we've got, and the main thing is that they're approved for this rim width. So probably purely my fault. That's the only issue I've ran into, is when I was running them on the wrong rim. So to be able to say it's the only tyre I've never punctured is a big deal. They're not invincible. It's probably going to happen one day, but they are a bloody solid tyre. And when I look at tyres, people like to look at all different aspects of tyres and how they choose a tyre, and obviously that's great, and it depends what you're doing. If you mainly stick to bitumen, you're going to look at a tyre that performs well on the bitumen, obviously. For me, the number one thing is punctures. That's pretty much all I care about. If you get the wrong tyre out here, which I've done before, you end up with punctures all the time. I've destroyed sets of tyres within 20,000 Ks just because they're the wrong kind of tyre. They're a bit of a lightweight all-terrain with like maybe a 2-ply sidewall. They just don't do any good. Rightio, so gone a bit flash with this one. I've kind of prepared some stuff. So look, the Maxxis I was running, to be honest, they're probably my least favourite tyre I've ever ran, and I'm not going to run them ever again, I dare say. So look, in the end, I probably did about 30,000 kilometres with the Maxxis. I don't really generally rotate tyres now that I'm running a wider offset on the back there. And I'll get into that a bit more one day, but that's purely for looks, as silly as that might sound. The narrow rear end has never bothered me with driving. Everyone goes on about it. Everyone likes to talk shit about it and whatever. It's really each to their own. And I'm not saying that it's not a problem for other people. I've never had a problem with it. It's never bothered me once. People have reached out and said that they didn't have a problem with it either until they started towing. So there is that to take into consideration. I tow a lot with my little trailer, but obviously it's not a 3-ton caravan. And, I am running the wider offset now. My old man has a couple of cruisers that he uses for work. They are 90% bushwork. He tows a lot. He's never had a drama. He's the sort of old, bush bloke that if you ask him something like that, like, how's a narrow rear diff, he'll look at you like you're a dickhead and wonder what you're talking about. Like, he knows about it, but he's like, I just drive it. There's nothing wrong with it. You know, he's never really given it much thought. It doesn't bother him. So it's funny. Everyone's going to have a different opinion, but I've never had a drama with it. So for me, it's purely for looks. But anyway, sort of getting lost in the weeds there. Because I'm running that wider offset on the back, obviously it makes it harder to do rotations unless you go and take the rubber off the actual rims and rotate that way. I don't know if you can hear my dogs chewing. They're both chewing on bones. Hope not. Hope it's not coming through too loud. But anyway, you get that. But with the Maxxis, I was having issues with bad steering wobble at about 80 kilometers per hour. And I had a couple of people reach out to me and let me know that they were having the same issues. Now, I got the tires rotated, so the rubber actually pulled off the rims and rotated and rebalanced, because I thought that would be the issue. That didn't help at all. I also had the vehicle would pull left really bad, like real bad. So after the rotation and balancing didn't do a thing, I kind of thought, there's probably something else going on with steering components, worn bushes, I don't know, something. But my instinct was telling me it was the tires, but I didn't know for sure. So anyway, I ended up with the rotation. Obviously the backs went to the front and vice versa. The rears were pretty badly worn, so they went to the front. The rears always wear down a lot quicker for me. And then I got the fronts put on the back, which was going to give me a lot more longevity out of them with the better tires on the rear. But I kind of ended up cutting it short and getting these Toyos fitted just a couple of days ago. And I've got a pretty serious trip coming up potentially that I can't really discuss at the moment, but you'll hear about it soon. So I obviously need this thing to be in tip-top shape for that trip, and new tires is one of those things. Yeah, I really didn't have a good run with them. I also punctured 3 out of the 4 Maxxis. So what happened was, when they were brand new, they were about a week old, not even a week old. I ended up with a massive stick in the sidewall of one, which destroyed it. It was a huge gash. Look at that, folks. Isn't that just fucking great? Partly my fault. I drove into a fallen limb off a tree. I thought I missed it and I didn't. I just drove straight into I was driving past it, probably doing 60, and I just skimmed it. And then immediately stick got bloody stuck in the sidewall, and that was the end of that tyre. Look, that was, like I said, partly my fault, but would have another tyre stood up to that? Would have the Toyo stood up to that? I'm not sure. That was probably pretty bad luck, and that probably would have happened to any tyre, but it's got to be mentioned. So there was that puncture. I also had a stick through a sidewall on another tyre. I plugged that, and then that was okay. And then I ended up with the front left, a slow leak. That was ultra annoying. I had to pump that up pretty much every 2 days, back to 40 PSI, and then it would slowly come down. And then by day 2 or 3, roughly, it'd be at 25, 20, so I'd have to pump it back up. Now, even when the tyre shop did the rotation, I told them about the slow leak. They couldn't even find it. So I thought, yeah, I don't know what was going on there. I had that tyre was actually slow leaking in its original spot, which was on the rear. And I thought, maybe, what if I've got a cracked rim or something? Because that is a possibility. But then once I got them rotated and that slow leak tyre went to the front, it was still doing it. So it was obviously the tyre. I would say another thing I noticed with those tyres more than probably any other tyre I've run, aside from soft all-terrains and soft factory tyres, is they seemed to balloon a lot. They just had that look, which I don't like that. I don't like the look of that. But I wondered if maybe their sidewalls were more exposed than, say, these Toyos. These are a very stiff sidewall. So we'll have a bit of a discussion while I've gone back to the 285s, and I've, posted a couple of times on Instagram about this, and obviously a lot of people are
interested in asking me why did I go back to a 285, and some people are saying they were about to go to a 35 from a 285, but they want to wait to hear my thoughts and all that sort of stuff. Look, at the end of the day, you know, I had my fun with the 2 sets of 35s that I ran. There was the Maxxis and then the Nitto Ridge Grapplers before the Maxxis. I just wanted to try them out. I've only ever ran 1 set of 35s prior to these ones, and that was on an old 75 series I had, and I didn't even have them on there for that long. I bought the car with the 35s already on it, and then I don't know, I ran them for a bit, got rid of them, and ended up going to 285s. So this is the first proper time I've actually run 35s, and it was purely just to see, you know, just to when I first got this, I ran the stock tyres for about 7,000k, and then I went to 285s in the Toyo, and they're the ones, like I was saying earlier, that I chucked on the factory rims. Yeah, so first time properly running 315s or 35s really, and it's one of those things. I had a scratch I wanted to itch. It's itched, you know. I did the 2 sets. I'm not going to say I'll never go back to 35s, because who knows, never say never. And it's good on a cruiser. You can get them to fit very easily with a 2-inch lift, and that's all I'm running. Now, so we'll run through the reasons why I decided to go back to a 33 and why I think it's a better tyre than a 35. So, obviously a 33 is going to weigh less than a 35, generally speaking. And with that comes better fuel economy. So one thing I noticed when I was first running 285s on this, and then I went to a 35, I immediately noticed the fuel economy went down the toilet, which is obvious, and I knew it was going to happen. And it was by a fair amount too. Couple of litres per 100, I would say. So not too good. At the moment, it's sitting on about 17.5 or 17.6 per 100. That's what the computer says. Obviously, it's not accurate because you're running bigger rubber. So I'm probably getting roughly 600 Ks to 100 litres. So probably roughly burning 16 litres per 100. But that's very rough. I've actually never properly worked it out. So, yeah, you're going to get better fuel economy. That's one of the biggest things for me. I do a lot of travel, and fuel is money, you know. So that was one of the biggest considerations. When we talk about this, we're talking about pure what's logical and what's practical. And that's what I'm about 90% of the time. And then we leave 10% for looks, what we think looks nice on the rig. And
so I just thought I'd chuck in there, I'm currently editing this out, and I thought I'd mention that I actually think it looks better on 33s now, to be honest. And I know that's probably going to be a funny thing to most people, and I always thought, now that I've gone to 35s, how will I go back down to 33s when you're specifically just talking about looks, because it's going to look like it's got forklift tyres now. But it's funny, I went down to 33s, and I can honestly say I didn't even really notice much of a difference. The main difference I noticed was the width. That's what the first thing I noticed going down to a 285 was the width. But I think it looks better.
You know, things like, you know, I have to run a bull bar anyway, but let's pick the one that I think looks good, and, you know, etc. Also, there's the wear and tear. So running bigger rubber, you're obviously, because they're heavier, it's got to be more wear and tear on the driveline. And because they're a bigger tyre, you got to think there's more leverage than a smaller tyre. So you're putting more strain, I would have thought, on things like axles, studs, potentially bearings, that sort of stuff. So while I didn't have any dramas with the 35s, it's just, again, it's all about practicality and what's logical. And the 33s should give you less, should be better on wear and tear, and therefore probably better on parts, the longevity, you know. Also, another thing to talk about is just the manual labour. Might sound silly, but when you're trying to lug around 35s, change them, chuck them up on the back of the ute, like, yeah, I can do it, no problem, but it's just something to take into consideration. They're that much heavier, they're that much hard work to lug around, lift around, and change a tyre when you got to change one. Another thing to think about is, again, weight, GVM. Might sound silly, but every kilogram counts. And if you're going to go for that big rubber just cause and you think it looks good, you're eating into that precious GVM. I've got no GVM upgrade on this. I've never done it on any full drive. A lot of people run out and it's the first thing they get. Obviously, if you need one, you need one. I don't really need one. A lot of the times I'm under GVM or I'm right at it. And, you know, these having a GVM of 3.5 ton these days, which is very handy. So, but yeah, if the bigger rubber is just going to eat straight into that. So I guess another thing with the 33s is you would have to think there's less rolling resistance, a smaller tyre, and also the tyre is more narrow. So there's less rubber on the road, I guess. There's less friction, right? So less rolling resistance with a smaller tyre. Better braking is another big consideration. I definitely feel the brakes are better with the smaller rubber. I never had dramas with the 35s. In fact, pretty cool story. Late at night on the bitumen, I didn't see a cow. She come out of a bush. I was probably 50 meters from her doing 110 late at night. I thought for sure I was going to hit this cow. I jammed on the brakes and it actually, there was like a warning screen that popped up on the computer screen and it braked so hard, incredibly hard. So I don't know if that's a part of the emergency braking system in these or whatever, but I was properly surprised. That was with the 35s. It pulled up like that. I honestly couldn't believe it. But generally speaking, the brakes feel and work a lot better with the smaller rubber. So, that's a massive tick. Better handling as well, I reckon. Just remember a lot of this is obvious and logical, but some of this is, it's just my experience and my opinion. So I feel like the 33s handle a lot better. There's, you've still got a good sidewall for the bush. That's the thing. You don't want to be heading into the bush with like 18-inch rims or whatever. So I like running the 16-inch rims. I don't... 17s are all right. I just don't like running them really, personally. But obviously with the 35, you've got more rubber. But I feel like these handle better, probably because there's a bit less rubber. So just the overall feel and steering, I feel like is better on 33s. Had to put a bloody jacket on. It's a bit cold sitting in the shade, eh? Very nice out in the sun though. Rightio, where were we at? Better handling. Yeah, I reckon lighter steering too. I think I noticed straight away. Stepping down from the 35s is the steering felt lighter, which was very nice. So again, I suppose this is something I didn't jot down, but 35s would have to put more strain on steering components, you would think, right? That's the other thing, going back when I was talking about leverage. When you're talking about bending steering arms and that sort of stuff, when the going gets tough, I guess bigger rubber, you're going to have a lot more chance of doing that. So again, we're just talking about what's practical and what's logical, what's sensible, Do you really need to go up to a 35? The answer is probably not. Less noise too. Now I know that's tyre dependent, tyre type as well. The Maxxis I didn't find too noisy, and a lot of people do say that. They were, there's noise there. They're a big mud terrain, but it wasn't too bad. And that's, for me, when I'm picking a tyre noise is on the bottom rung. I don't really care about it. I just care about punctures, really, off-road ability. But I would think that because they're a wider tyre, they have more tread, right? They have to be noisier. There's more tread hitting the ground. So if you're worried about noise, it's probably another thing to think about. Also, obviously stepping down to a 285, you're going to have better response, acceleration, better power, torque. It's not going to... Staying at a standard size is great. You go to a 33, you feel a bit of a difference. You go to a 35, you feel a lot of difference. Now, I've said a few times that I don't mind the way this drives at all, even on 35s. People whinge and complain that they're useless and you can't even reverse out of your driveway without a tune and a catch can and this and that. But for me, it's fine. Like, the power's fine. I just drive it. I mean, back in the day, we all used to drive old diesels with like 80 horsepower. No one really complained because we weren't trying to drive Ferraris, So for me, it's no issue at all on 35s. You definitely feel it, but it's fine. I just drove it. I feel like as well, 33s are really a sweet spot for the revs and the gearing. I will say though, I did like the 35s. The 35s drop the revs a lot, and they do stretch the gearing. Now, obviously, we all know the gearing's pretty short in these, and I think in 2017 they went in the gearbox and lengthened second and fifth gear, because fifth gear highway revs are pretty high. So that's definitely helped, the lowering of the fifth gear. But the 35s definitely dropped the revs even more. So there's a funny thing there with, do the 35s help reduce fuel usage more so than 33s? Just purely because of how much they're dropping revs. But no way, I get better fuel economy with the 285s across the board. So yeah, that's why I feel like they're in a sweet spot, because the 33s do stretch the gearing a little bit, they drop the revs a bit, but you do get the better fuel. So I really like them for that. Now, another thing is they take up less room as a spare tyre. Might sound a bit silly, but like on the back there where I've got my spare tyre mounted behind the canopy, the 35 was massive up there. Since going to a 33, there is so much more room there. So that's a massive consideration, especially when we're talking about, you know, us people with full drives that you use them for touring and camping, and weight and room is paramount. It's like they're number one to each other. So that's another big consideration, especially if you're the type of person to run 2 spare tyres. I used to, and you know, after a lot of years and kilometres and stuff, with really good tyres, I don't need to run 2 spares, so I don't do it. Also, I guess there's the potential for these to be cheaper, the smaller tyre. Now, when I was looking at running 35s, I looked at a true 35 17-inch rim. They're like $700. I looked at a couple of different brands. When I looked at the 315 on a 16-inch rim, you're talking, I paid, I think, $440 each for the Nitto Ridge Grapplers. And then the Maxxis were about $530, $40 maybe. Whereas if I had went to a true 35 on a 17-inch rim, you're talking $750. That's insane. So a 315 is not that, it is pretty good. And in fact, like when I was paying $440 for a Nitto as a 315, that's cheaper than most 33s and even like 32s and that I was running on Hiluxes. But these Toyos I picked up for, I think, about that price. So yeah, there is the potential for the smaller tyre to be found a bit cheaper, but if you're going for like a 315, they're not too expensive at all. The other thing is, I think a tyre of this size, if we're specifically talking about these versus a 35, is these are way more better suited to everyday use. Oh, the flies. Get out of me eye, mate. Yeah, way better suited to everyday use. Is this thing on or what? And touring and work, etc., that kind of stuff. So obviously everyday use, road use, you're going to be much better off with something like this for all the reasons we just spoke about. Touring, same thing. You're going to be better off for all the reasons we just listed, work, all that kind of stuff. Now, don't get me wrong, you can easily run 35. It's, you know, we're just discussing why I went back down and what are the reasons, what's the logical, practical reasons to do that. So I think if you're doing these things like most people are doing, the way most people use their vehicles, like you don't need to go to that tyre size, and maybe you'll just do it because it looks cool or it looks nice on Instagram, and if that's the case, that's cool. I had my fun with 2 sets, I get it, you know, but yeah, definitely just not necessary. In saying that, I do understand the need for different tyres. If you're doing crazy deep mud, hard wheeling, you know, all that sort of stuff, then of course it makes sense, right? It would be silly to go do crazy tough winch tracks on factory tyres that are designed for the highway. A, they're too small. B, they've got no grip. Like, you're using the wrong tool for the job. So that makes sense. In saying that, I have seen a couple of blokes, one fella in particular, wheeling a pretty much stock Hilux. He's really good in the scene. He's like one of the best drivers out there. And he's taken this stock Hilux up tracks that most people couldn't take their flash rigs with lockers and stuff. So he really knows, he's a very good driver and knows the lines and that sort of shit. So he's probably the exception to the rule. So it can be done. But yeah, obviously I'm not discounting the need for the, you know, bigger tyre, the more aggressive tyre, for sure. If you're doing that hard wheeling, twin locked, you got a big, you know, winches and all that sort of stuff, then yeah, for sure. So obviously, you know, everything has its uses. So when doing that sort of stuff, then yeah, for sure, you might step up to a 35 or 37 or whatever. Now, before we finish up, or I guess another thing before we go with the 35s is the one thing I really liked about them was their ability. They're a big, chunky, aggressive tyre that is good for the bush. There's, I guess because they're a bigger tyre, they're wider, there has to be more traction. That's probably a plus, especially when you're in the wet and in the mud and in all that kind of stuff. And I have been caught out in floodwaters out here whilst running the Maxxis, and I felt like they gripped well and did pretty well in that scenario. And I see people that are in the game that do the hardcore wheeling that run those Maxxis and say they're a good thing. So I think they offer good grip for that kind of wheeling. And the overall running that 35s gives you, you know, roughly an inch more overall vehicle height or clearance over a 33. It's going to lift the diff up that much more, which is a big plus for me. And that was one of the main reasons I wanted to try them, was to just lift everything off the ground even more. Because the amount of times I smashed my rear diff lock actuator, I'd chuck a new bloody bash plate on it. A month later, it's destroyed. It's pushed back into the diff lock actuator. All the bloody cable, the wiring loom's destroyed. Like, you should see under my car, it's bloody, the rock damage is crazy and all that sort of stuff. So obviously, I thought that was going to be a big plus, being able to lift the car overall more. So I guess that, which is an important thing. If you're talking about, like I said, the damage I've had, and just generally, if you're into remote stuff, sticks flicking up, fuel tanks, radiators, wiring, all like fuel lines, all that kind of shit. These rigs are pretty solid and there's nothing too complicated, but you still have fuel lines and the potential to, you know, get you into some strife. So that was one of the biggest things. I really wanted to see how I'd go lifting the car more overall. So one last thing with the Maxxis, look, we're all going to have different experiences, you know, running different products, and that's the way it is through all facets of life. And there's people like Ronnie Dahl and Keelan from Sarah Keelan Travels that run those Maxxis that swear by them. So don't know what they're talking about. They do a lot of remote traveling and that sort of stuff. So by all accounts, they've had good runs with them. I'm pretty sure Keelan's even said he's got 80,000 K out of a set on his 200 series. I think, don't quote me. I think that's what I heard him say on one of his episodes. So, I mean, they like them, and so that's cool. You know, I can only go off my experience, and it's a bit like that with everything. But yeah, I think that's about it anyway. So I'm going to be sticking with the 285s for now. It's really the way to go. I think they suit a cruiser with a 2-inch lift really well. There's no need to step up to the 35. And I'll definitely be sticking with the Toyo Open Country Mud Terrains. Hands down my favourite tyre. Like I said, the only tyre I have not punctured, which is unbelievable. And you got to think too, I get a lot of people, mainly old fellas and bush blokes, telling me, oh, you should be running bloody rag tyres, like the old MRFs and whatever, that are about this wide, proper pizza cutters, big super lugs. I think they're 14 ply. They're like a bias ply, not a radial. So I think so. And I always say, yeah, look, we have run them out bush before, but it was always on dedicated, you know, ball catchers and that sort of stuff. They are really not, they're the worst tyre on earth for the sand, and all I do is sand. Not all, but a lot of it is sand. You would use a lot more fuel. And also, I think they're speed rated to something like 90k an hour. I'm not getting on the highway to sit on 90 if I can do 110. And there's a lot of they're good, but there's a lot of negatives. There's no way I'm ever going to stick him on a rig like this to do what I do. Again, if it's for a dedicated station rig, that's probably all I'd run. That'd be bloody good, you know. And the other thing too is there's such a heavy, solid tyre that I don't know how you would go running them aired down. And because they're so heavy and solid, they are so rough. They are so rough on the vehicle. I don't know that they'd be, that, you know, the cruisers handle them and whatever. Like I said, we used to run them on dedicated station cruisers and bull catchers, but they are so rough. I wouldn't really want to run them on something like this. There's no comfort. They'd be shit for the driveline, I reckon. Well, I suppose that'll do for now. And yeah, take it easy, guys. Cheers.